With rabbit ears, or should I put them up in the air? Come on, somebody in the front help me. My Australian, what?
Okay.
Is this the right way? The other way is in the front, like it. What do you guys think? I can hear it fine. Does it look alright, or look like a speed racer?
Are we ready?
Yeah.
I don't think that Mr. Oliverem Stonem actually needs any introduction here. After you have seen him at a festival for 2 days, we are very happy to have him here. Maybe I should just say that he is this year's recipient of the Crystal Globe Lifetime Achievement Award. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm sure you know all about the movies he is presenting here, so we can start the press conference. It's gonna take 35 minutes. The gentleman in the second row.
Yes, hello, it's Ninos Mikelidis from Greece. I have two questions. One, starting from Alexander, I mean you're presenting it again in a new version, I suppose. But Alexander is not just an epic adventure, it's also about dominance, world dominance of the time. So today we have the same thing, but in a different way, through the various technologies, spying on people. So I would like your opinion what's going on, especially with Snowden. And the second question is the new film you are going to make about the history of the United States. It reminded me of the people's history of Howard Zinn's. Is it affiliated to that kind of history you are preparing? Thank you very much.
Wow, you have hit the nerve on the head with your two questions. Only a Greek to get to the point so quickly. Very good questions. It's going to take a little time to answer. I would like to start with the second one. First of all, I think you're a little bit misunderstanding. The history, the untold history of the United States is already being shown. It's finished. It's been shown in the United States on premium cable in November of 12 all the way to January of 13. We just finished it. It's also been shown in England on premium cable, Australia, Japan, Israel, Turkey, and continues to be shown around the world. I've been talking with my co-author, Peter Koznick, historian at the American University, extensively about it. I've gone to colleges, universities, librarian associations, teacher associations, all over the United States and the world. We've been in France and England. We've been talking up this series. So Greece, unfortunately, right now is a bit economically, been cut off. But I do hope the news gets there. I heard they cut off the news to Greece too, at least the public broadcasting. But I really would love you to know that it is out there. And Greece could buy it. Greece could buy it and put it on television. We'll sell it for nothing practically, because we want the Greek people to really get this history. The Greeks are in it substantially. The Greek Cold War kicks off a lot of the... is this being translated at the same time? I hope so.
Yeah.
Because I do run on. The Greek Civil War kicks off a lot of the Cold War motivation for the United States to impose its will. In fact, Truman declared an entire new foreign policy as a result of the Greek Civil War, which was, I think, a misstated policy that the United States would defend against. And he mentioned the word terrorists in 1946, 7. He mentioned the word terrorists when he was talking about communists. It's very interesting. So Mr. Truman precedes George Bush by 50 years. The Greek Civil War and also the Greek coup d'etat in the 1960s is a fundamental, another suppression of democracy by the Johnson administration. Lyndon Johnson told the Greek ambassador in Washington, listen guy, you're a flea, we're an elephant. When a flea gets in the way of an elephant, we crush him. Your democracy is a flea. And he got rid of that democracy very shortly in an ugly coup d'etat. And we brought to power in Greece. I'm just going down this because it's a typical example of untold history. It's out there, it's reported, but people don't know. They don't remember it. They miss the overall pattern, and that's what we try to do in 70 years of history, which has been forgotten in my country, to teach, to remember what the United States has done in 70 years. And the overall pattern is very important. It's not taught in high school. It's not taught to Americans. Nowhere has this come together in one form, except in this untold history. It's very important to me. So anyway, the United States in 1967 brought to power a gentleman, a prime minister called Papadopoulos, as I remember, one of the ugliest human beings you've ever seen. Look at his picture and you'll get an example of it. He was a Greek Nazi. He hunted down communists during the Second World War for the Nazis, very proud. He came to power in Greece. Typical example, another one of hundreds of examples of this 70-year reign, which this gentleman very astutely got to the point of, and he said, now we are the sole superpower. The United States is the dominant power in the universe, with eavesdropping abilities, military abilities, cyber abilities, space, sea, land, air, and cyberspace. Unbelievable, unknown. What they call in the Pentagon talk as full spectrum dominance. Full spectrum dominance. You made a very strong point, and untold history is out there. It's about this dominance. And to your first question, which was about, repeat please, just a bit. The first question was about, yeah, Alexander, right. We go back to Alexander, which is a very good point. Alexander is a very, I was thinking about this. I watched the movie last night with this new version, which is 10 years later, 10 years late. It's the best version of the movie because it allowed me to play with the, on DVD, with all the elements. Thank God for technology, because you can now do on DVD what you can do on film for very little money. And we were able to make a movie that finally, at 3 hours and 20 minutes, it tells the story as best as I can tell it. It's a complex story about a son, a mother, and a father. And the son is a torn explorer. He's a torn, talented, but very, very civil war rages in his breast because his mother and his father hate each other and they love each other, and they go back and forth and they rip him to shreds. And the story that had to be told that I originally wrote in 2004 for that movie was of a man who was haunted his whole life. He goes to the end of the world to avoid his mother, to run away from his mother. His father has been assassinated. He always will. His honor has been stained by this assassination. He goes to the edge of the world to find him, but he never can forget his past. He never can outrun his past. And so it had to be made. Always, its origin was a parallel story between the past and the present. And we would go back and forth from the exploration of the world to the backstory with Mom and Dad. And it was a hell of a backstory. So when you see this version, it's the best integrated cut of that parallel story. In the original, I was too chronological, and we lost the parents too early in the movie. Their resonance was lost. When you see it last night, I think the audience stayed. We talked to about 12:30 in the morning. It was a wonderful audience of people who appreciated this complex story. That it cannot be told in modern terms. It has to be told in, I think, classical Greek drama terms. This gentleman points up the contradiction, the seeming contradiction. I don't see it as a contradiction. Because Alexander existed at the beginning of time, there was recorded history started in the West in the 6th century BC. Alexander was operating at the very earliest level. The only known empire that had existed was the Persian, and before that the Assyrian and the Babylonian. And frankly, in those days, they had a bad reputation among the Western people who read about it as slave-owning, cruel. Aristotle teaches the Persian Empire to the young Alexander as an oppressive empire. The East in Greek mythology has always been a very rich source of treasure. All the Greek heroes, Theseus, Jason, Perseus, they all go east. Heracles, Dionysus, they all go to the east to make their fortune. And they come back with the loot, with the wives, with the richness of the east. The West was poor. Greece was poor in comparison. And this young boy was the one person who did the opposite. And he tells Aristotle, he says, why do these people go east? And Aristotle says, well, there's a lot of these myths and this and fantasies, fairy tales, tabloid stories. But Alexander goes to the east, and he was the first person that I know of who stays. He said to his Greeks, these Asians, we should work together. We have to build a cultural, mental, physical empire of Alexandrians that will be a world government. And it will be, yes, I will be in charge because I am the king of Macedonia. But he's not a stupid man. He was hoping, I think, to give this idea of a combination of Greek and Asian culture intermarried. He encouraged the soldiers to marry. He gave them all kinds of financial recompensation for marrying. He treated them very well. He gave them land in the East. He gave the Easterners back what he didn't steal from the East. He gave them back. He enriched both East and West. It's an interesting story. He is the opposite of George Bush, who the movie was compared to George Bush as it came out in 2004, which was 1 year after Bush invaded Iraq. My timing was terrible, but you know, Bush made a disaster of Iraq. Did everything that the Western colonialists are known for: rape, loot, destroy the culture, trash the place, make as much money as possible, and get the fuck out. What he did, Alexander, was stay. He didn't trash. He stayed. He respected the property. He respected the people. And frankly, he brought together in his short life an empire never had existed before in the history of man. An empire, as I said in the movie, of the mind. Nobody has quite lived up to Alexander. He is the youngest person ever in the history of the world to have such power. Young people have never acceded to that power, except with some exceptions, like Fidel Castro and Che Guevara came to power in their 30s in Cuba, and they tried very hard to put their revolutionary ethic into being. It happens so rarely in history. We always look to the young when they grab that power. And I think Alexander caught the imagination of the world. Even Julius Caesar was famous for this, saying, I reached the age of 50 and I had achieved nothing. When I looked at Alexander's tomb in Alexandria, I was heartbroken, devastated. I would never be an Alexander. All through time, Eastern cultures, Western cultures, Alexandria could admire. Now, if you reduce Alexander to a dictator, as this gentleman nicely does, it's not fair to Alexander, because he was the proto-man. He existed before all these horrible histories of domination were written, before Napoleon's, who admired Alexander, before Hitler and the worst of them, and George Bush, and all the people who abstained the word. But the world did not have any kind of organization. It was tribes. Now, the concept of you call domination is one thing, but the way Alexander controlled the situation and dominated, to me, was a great example for the world. It could have been successful, and it was an example, frankly, of the United Nations, because if you think about it, Alexander was allowing for different cities to grow. He wanted a Carthage. There would have been a Carthage. There would have been a Rome. There would have been a city in Spain. There would have been a city in Egypt. There would have been a city in Greece, Athens. There would have been cities in Western Asia, Eastern Asia. There was a possibility for an interdependent world of trade and culture, out of which all mankind would benefit. I don't see him as a tyrant.
There's a gentleman.
This is a good debate.
Okay.
I didn't want to imply that he was a dictator. I was talking about conquering. I mean, as you rightly said, there for various reasons that he conquered the world, and the way Bush or other people have doing it since then.
I'm trying for an audience who doesn't know much about Alexander, just to explain what a special man this is. He, to me, is, why would I devote so many years of my life to making a movie? It's just, I do see him as something different, and I tried to bring that out in the movie. And I think this version does the best of it. But I also emphasize how torn he was, miserable, and somebody was suffering from his parents. Okay, questions answered. Next. Hello, sir.
You deal with a lot of very powerful men in your films, but key figures in history, male figures. Are there any female figures that you find as fascinating, and would you consider giving them a cinematic treatment in some way, and if so, who?
Maggie Thatcher.
Possibly.
I don't admire Maggie Thatcher. I don't admire Hillary Clinton. And it's not. It's not about gender, and it's not about skin. I made a movie about a woman. It was a beautiful movie, one of my favorites. It's called Heaven and Earth, and it's about a very powerful woman. She was 4'11", a Vietnamese villager, small woman. She wouldn't even register, but she had strength, heart. So she was based on Layli Haislip, who I got to know very well. And it's a story of a Vietnamese villager who has no choice in a time when the French come to her village and the Americans come to her village, and then the Viet Cong come to her village. She goes back and forth between sides. She's torn by war. Everything happens to her. She's raped, she suffers, she becomes a prostitute on the streets. She ends up marrying an American man and going back to America with him and having an incredible life. He dies, and then she meets another American who becomes, I think, her husband and a father of another one of her children. And she's torn apart again in this relationship where he commits suicide in the end. And the role was played by Tommy Lee Jones in the movie. If you ever have a chance to watch Heaven and Earth, it's all about this woman. And I think she was a young, unknown actress. Because the Americans are not interested at all in the Vietnamese, and because they don't really ever apologize for the Vietnam War, there was very little interest in the film in America. But it continues to play in the Far East, and it has its following. So I do care about women. If it's the right story, I will tell it, but I don't operate on that idea of gender or race, just making a movie for that purpose. I don't do movies for ideological reasons. I do them because I get impassioned about them. I tried to develop Evita for about 7 years. I worked on Evita. I hated the movie that they made, but I almost made one. And I think I could have made a great movie with Meryl Streep, but it didn't happen. But for just this by an inch. Evita, the musical. Now, she was a very interesting, powerful. So it wasn't about that. People say I only like powerful men. I think that's a silly idiotic categorization.
Is the gentleman in the second one?
Hi, Oliver here, Paulo from Portugal. Hi.
Hello.
Obviously, we're all delighted with your political vision. It has been throughout your films, and obviously with these talks and conversations. Of course, we have seen some people involved with cinema in political positions that will be unnamed here. But I'm just asking if you would consider yourself to be more vocal in a political idea in the US. You think that we could all benefit from that? Is that something that you're thinking about, maybe? Or you would?
I don't know why I'm wearing these rabbit ears. Everybody is speaking English here. Is that better? Yeah. If I need it, I would sort of. Yes. Your answer. I am a dramatist. I've always said I'm a dramatist. I tell a story. That's what I was trained to do. That's what I believe in. Even the untold history of the United States, as political as it seems, is a story. It's a great story of a country that loses its way, which is a relatively innocent country before World War II, becomes obsessed with the idea of national security. It's national security, and it's the threat of communism, worldwide communism, dominating the United States. What the United States goes through from 1945 is unbelievable story of paranoia. When you look at the Soviet Union objectively after World War II, it is devastated. It is a poor country. They need money. They want the money that has been promised by Roosevelt. And the United States acted very meanly towards the Soviet Union. Not only in denying it reparations, but cutting it out of the economic picture at Bretton Woods. And above all, acting as an overall bully. And the most monstrous action of World War II, the most monstrous action after Hitler's atrocities would be the dropping of the atomic bomb bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There was no need to drop those bombs, no need at all. They were done as a barbaric action to show the Soviet Union that they had no position in the world, in the Far East above all, but especially in Europe. It was a warning, a clear warning. So that killed off any concept of a grand alliance, which Roosevelt and Stalin and Churchill held in mind. Roosevelt unfortunately died in April of '45, which was one of the most tragic premature deaths. If he'd lived 3 more months, the world would have been a different place. But Truman was a small man, and he had bad advice. He dropped those bombs in August, and the world has never been the same because the United States achieved enormous superiority and moral power because the United States in its heart was convinced that it dropped those atomic bombs for necessary reasons. The implied historical reason is the United States had to end the war, had to win the war, end the war of Japan because they were A, fanatics, and B, the United States would suffer more than 100,000 casualties taking the Japanese islands, both of which are specious. And we go into some detail on why that is a lie. And people believe it to this day. It's in the history books. You read it. My daughter, who's 17, has it in her high school textbook. My son just read it. Same thing. It's the same continuation of a brainwashing. What Pravda and Izvestia did in the old days of the Soviet Union, those of you who are old enough to remember in Czechoslovakia, is nothing compared to what's going on with the United States and its propaganda. It's so entrenched in the belief system of the country that we have no doubts. We never question the atomic bomb, which is the founding myth of this national security state. The national security state begins with Truman, with Greece, and the Greek Civil War, things like this. And out of that comes the most armed country in the history of the world, with the most amount of atomic and nuclear weaponry ever seen. Eisenhower has enormous, has 30,000 nuclear weapons by the time his budget cycle ends in 1960. 30,000 nuclear weapons on the United States has. Totally dominating the Soviet Union, totally in charge. And the Americans are so naive that we convince ourselves in the 1960 election that we are at a disadvantage. And this is a constant theme in America, whether it's cyber warfare with the Chinese or nuclear warfare with the Soviets, we're always behind. And out of that, we keep building and building. But the big point is that we, after the Soviet Union falls in 1991, instead of declaring an end to this Cold War, instead of disarming, the United States doesn't hesitate, it keeps right on going and becomes very quickly a sole superpower and, more importantly, a global security state. And to answer your question about Snowden, to go back to your question, we'll get to the point, which is that we are a global security state, we are a sole superpower, we are dominant, totally dominant. This man, Snowden, who to me is a hero because he has revealed secrets that should concern us all, secrets that show that the United States government has been violating the Fourth Amendment repeatedly since 2003. This man has no place to hide in the world except a few countries in South America. Why? Because no country, every country is in some way intimidated by the United States. And this should not be. This is what's wrong with the world today. In the 1950s, this never could have happened because there was a Soviet Union that was willing to challenge the United States, willing to fight. There was also many third world countries that would call themselves neutral. There was a thing called the neutral bloc. There were leaders like Nasser in Egypt, Nehru in India, Tito in Yugoslavia next door, Nkrumah in Africa, and Sukarno was a great leader in Indonesia. We got rid of several of these leaders, the United States did. We could not get rid of Nehru, we tried, but we couldn't touch him. We couldn't touch Tito. Tito was a tough guy. He lasted. But the rest they got rid of. To say the point is that the United States considered neutrality, back in the 1950s, John Foster Dulles called neutrality immoral. Neutrality was immoral. Think about it. To be neutral was immoral. You had to be either part of the United States, or as George Bush said, you're either with us or you're against us. That's what John Dulles was saying. The Soviets were more tolerant of neutrality and tried to get along with the neutral bloc. The United States couldn't. We tried to control everything. We tried to control these fates of these countries, and the CIA was extremely effective in getting rid of any opposition, as was the World Bank, as was the International Monetary Fund, and so forth and so on. But Europe stands out to me because I grew up. My mother was French. I grew up in the 1950s in Europe, and I remember de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle, vividly standing up to the United States and saying, no, we're dropping out of NATO. France pulled out of NATO. People forget this. France was independent and considered itself so. And I say that because François Hollande of France, who's now the president, calls himself a socialist, but not for 1 second would he even think about standing up to the United States now, when it's very important that the world recognize and give asylum to Snowden, because this concerns not just American citizens such as myself, but it concerns all of us. You, everyone in this room, is affected by the United States' Big Brother approach to controlling the world, which means global eavesdropping. Global eavesdropping. For example, if there's a politician in Greece who wants to change the balance of power, who wants to go against American interests in Greece, that politician is being listened in on by global satellite communications. Those secrets, which we have no business violating, can be given to anybody we so choose to destabilize that politician. If he gets in our way, we can get him removed. All we do is we give the secrets to his enemies in the country, in Greece, in India, in Indonesia. They'll do the job for us. They'll take care of that politician. He'll never even know the United States is involved. I'm rooting personally for Alexei Tsipras. I think he's an interesting and very strong choice, a really independent leader. How long can you stay independent in this world? How long can you speak for an independent view of the world with this system in place? This is very dangerous.
5 more minutes and then
No, I have to finish this because this is what's going on now. No, we can go longer. We don't have to 5 minutes. Don't believe her. She's trying to censor me.
Do whatever you want then.
In Greece, they were being listened to since the World War, the end of the World War. They didn't need the global.
In Greece, they've been listening, but you know, let's be honest. It's going everywhere. It's the Czech Republic. You know, is Czechoslovakia in Czech Republic in NATO?
Sure.
Who told you guys to join NATO? Who the hell told you to? NATO was a defensive alliance that was specifically created to defend Western Europe against the communist threat. It should have ended in 1991, and Bush, the father, told Gorbachev he would not expand NATO. Did he keep his word? No. Every country, practically to the border of Russia, is now in NATO. And what did NATO get you into Afghanistan? Did Czech Republic send troops to Afghanistan?
Yes.
Well, good for you. You're a good guy. You see, you don't want to cross the United States. That's my point. Nobody. Snowden can't find a home because there's no home to be had. That's a very unbalanced world. It's a very dangerous world. We need strong countries. We need a strong Brazil. We need a strong... I was very disappointed by Dilma in Brazil. She said no. How so quickly? How can she do that? Lula would have said yes, I believe. We need strong Brazil. We need a strong Turkey. We need a strong Egypt, and a strong China, and a strong Russia, and a strong Venezuela, and a strong Iran. The world would be a healthier place if it were multipolar. It is in danger with one tyranny. History has taught me one thing from this 5-year study, is that no empire will last, nor will the US empire last. 6 empires went down in the 20th century. 6. The German Empire among them. If you remember, Germany was completely dominant in 1941 and pretty scary. No one could stop Nazi Germany. They went down quickly. The Soviet Union, a big empire, went down in 1991. The United States was exulting, saying, capitalism, capitalism. Look what happened. I would predict to you that the same way the Soviet Empire's destruction surprised many of us, including, very surprised, that the United States, in some way, with its economy, its economic problems, where we have only the rich and only the poor, and we have an increasing gap, will in some way also destruct itself, auto-destruct itself. So history shows that empires end, tyrannies end.
Obama wasn't an answer, or isn't?
What?
Obama apparently isn't an answer for all those who voted in him.
No, sir. Obama is not the answer. He was not the reform candidate we thought we voted for in 2008. No. It's a disgrace that Obama is more concerned with hunting down Snowden than reforming the eavesdropping and the enforcement of these George Bush-type initiatives to strike at the war of terror. Obama should be reforming these injustices rather than concerning himself with this man Snowden, who's actually done the world a great favor and deserves to be asylum. He deserves to be a citizen of the United States. Yes, he should go back. The people who should go to jail are the Dick Cheneys and the George Bushes for war crimes.
Gallup from Finland. Since Hollywood is the key for America's cultural dominance of the world, and now Hollywood is making mostly fantasy movies and the whole film market is changing globally, how long will America's dominance, cultural dominance in the world last?
I have no idea, except, I think you should ask that the cultural dominance is part of the economic dominance and also part of the political dominance. Many of the Hollywood movies glorify the Pentagon, glorify the U.S. military, many of them. They're made often with the cooperation of the U.S. Pentagon. I have never had cooperation on any of my war movies from the Pentagon, ever. When you take their back with their money, when you take their weaponry and you show it, you do a disservice to the rest of humanity. And the messages are very subtle sometimes, very subtle, but you always feel behind it the dominance of the U.S. I think part of the cultural dominance, because the language is easy, I think English is the easiest language to learn. Winston Churchill was right. Anglo-Saxon language is perhaps the most transparent, gets through the world, and I think that helps. But and the Chinese language is very hard to learn for me, and I know a lot of people who have a problem with it. But I think China is very important in this game. They have economic might. I'm not saying that they're a perfect government by any means, but at least we need strong countries to say no to the United States. And
Okay, there's the last question here.
by the way, I just want to say one thing. I have directed last year. I directed Savages, which is an apolitical movie, although it's against the war on drugs, but it's an apolitical movie. What I'm trying to say is I am a dramatist. I'm trying to tell stories. When I tell untold history, it's not because I'm ideological. It's because I think it's a great story. And I learned as I went. I learned what the message I'm sharing with you today is one that I learned in untold history. 5 years ago, I don't think I would have said this in the same way. So I've learned from the experience of telling the story. You have to understand it's a little different. I'm not a journalist. I don't chase the news. I can't make a movie about Snowden overnight. I can't. It takes more than a year to make a movie, and you have to think about a movie. So dramatic art is a writing, directing, editing. It takes time. It's like a classic. It's like building a sculpture. You cannot do it overnight. You can write a journalist piece quickly. I can't.
Good afternoon, from the Czech Private TV. I'd like to know, I heard that you've been quite unhappy about the questions Czech journalists keep asking you, so I'd like to know what types of subjects we should avoid, not to make you angry.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've dealt with every question that's been thrown my way. There's nothing I've objected to. Who told you this rumor?
Well, that's a rumor, so the source should be...
I'm sorry?
It should be kept secret, I guess, the source, but the source should be kept secret. But I'd like to know...
There's no should in this world.
There's no should?
You can ask anything you want, and If I think it's a stupid question, I'll try to deal with it.
I have no choice. I would like to know what kind of reactions you've experienced when you, for example, when you expose these political views. What are the reactions you meet in Central Europe, be it the Czech Republic or elsewhere? Because, as you know, our post-communist views are probably usually different than yours. So, what's the reactions you have met so far?
I was in Czechoslovakia in 1978, and it was horrible. I know what you're talking about. I understand the bitterness and the anger. I thought the communist occupation of Eastern Europe was a terrible thing. But I would point out to you the origins of this, is that the Soviet government did not start to crack down on Eastern Europe until 1947, after the United States had engaged it in a very serious Cold War. So, you know, we have to be very careful. You have to look at the years 1944 to 1947 before you start talking about this. You have to go to the origins of this ideological battle between communism and capitalism. Czechoslovakia is a very interesting case, and we go into it. The murder of your prime minister, the name leads you. But it's a very, Czechoslovakia is part of that story. But look to the 1944, 46, 7 period and see who does what first. And you will, I think you will find an answer. It's a little bit different than what you've heard. Communism became oppressive and horrible, and it didn't work. There was no compassion in that system. And there were many problems. It fell of its own accord, not because of Ronald Reagan. It fell because it couldn't work. But of course, the right wing in America used the fall of communism as justification for its policies to continue around the world, which is capitalism at any price, the gap between rich and poor growing, money, 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 banks, 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 run the world. Is this the way we want to live? Is there not a third way? Is there not a neutral way?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.